Welcome to The Patient Physician, a space for doctors to explore their physical, mental, and financial wellness. Your peers and industry leaders will destigmatize institutional perceptions while redefining success, money, and personal care. Get ready to pull back the curtain because here, you are both patient and physician.
Welcome to The Patient Physician. I'm your host, Paul Smith, joined today by my co-host, Chris Fulbright.
How you doing, Paul? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm well. Thank you very much. Today, we're going to be talking to Ryan McCullough with Partners Real Estate. And before I introduce him, he was pretty gabby before we even got going. Let's just be honest.
That's
so
true.
I'm just not. That's why I'm saying just hang tight, Ryan. Hang on.
He's got a lot to say, a lot of knowledge to share.
I know. Quick little bio. Ryan started in his commercial real estate career in 2016 and specializes in medical office. His client first focus and tenacious work ethic helped him close over 150 transactions for approximately $500 million. Ryan believes the key to success is focusing on building long-term relationships by truly understanding his clients' needs and objectives and staying true to what is in their best interest. Now, as things continued and business reached capacity, Ryan co-founded the Medical Investment Group, a team of like-minded individuals who strive to provide the highest quality representation for property owners throughout Texas. As Partners became an independent national brand in 2022, the Medical Investment Group leads the charge for growing national investment sales team focused on medical office. So with that, welcome to the show, Ryan McCullough.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here. I appreciate both of your time. And I'd like to just point out that was written before ChatGPT was a thing. So I'm glad it sounded good.
So that took you like 3 hours to write.
That's right. He spent
pretty
all
much
Sunday afternoon rewriting that when you could have done it in 4 seconds. That's right.
You know, this is an interesting segue too. You graduated with a degree in business technology. And so ChatGPT must be something you might be excited about. But what's the bridge between that and real estate? How do you go from that to this?
From like information technology. Funny question. You know, I'm
a funny guy.
I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, as I'm sure most college people didn't or don't. And I knew it wanted to be something with business. I felt like computers were the future of the world. And so something in business related to computers. But then like my whole career path has always been sales related. And so it just kind of found my way into real estate. And I've been fortunate, you're right. I mean, using all the technological advances to our advantage and to our clients' advantage has been crucial in us growing and really scaling across the state and into other states.
So you're obviously in real estate, but focusing on medical buildings, medical investment. Tell us about the Medical Investment Group. Let's just start there and then tell us more about what you do and how you focus on working with physicians.
I love it. Yeah. So the medical investment, we're a team here at Partners Real Estate. Partners is one of the largest privately owned commercial real estate companies in Texas. We just expanded to Atlanta. The goal is to be a national brand in the next 5 years or so and have about 15, 20 offices. So the Medical Investment Group, my team is about 6 brokers, 3 support staff. Right now we operate mainly throughout Texas. I'd say 95% of our business is in Texas. Occasionally for some select clients, we'll go beyond that. But as the company grows, we want to grow as well. And so the Medical Investment Group, we really focus on middle market medical sales. We're not selling hospital buildings, and we're also not selling the 700 square foot little condo units. So we really focus on that like $1 to $15 million space. In that space, generally the clientele is, I'd say 50 to 70% physician and then 30% private investors or so. And so a lot of our clientele are physicians who own their building. They bought it a long time ago and they want to come up with an exit strategy and eventually retire, and whether they keep the building, they do a sale leaseback, they sell it vacant, they have a succession plan. Maybe they want to go buy a building with a group and create a partnership. And so all of those challenges physicians have with the real estate and the needs that they have to grow or to exit, we're there to help be advisors along the way.
I don't know if you know this statistic or even have a guess, but it seems like physicians have always tried to own their practice or the building in it. Is that still the case? Is there a trend upwards, stay the same, less percentage of people owning their own building?
That's a good question. I don't know the statistic, but I haven't seen a huge uptick or downtick either way. There's always been a lot of physicians who have looked at like the long-term trajectory and have tried to own their own real estate. To me, it's one of the best, retirement vehicles you can have. There's just too many tax advantages, long-term growth plans. There's too many benefits to ignore it. And so if you have the opportunity, I would recommend at least looking at it. But I see a lot of people, pretty much anyone who can tries to buy their real estate.
Are you seeing more opportunities come in the market? We've heard about the commercial market with loans becoming due and interest rate hikes and those types of things. We've talked single family. We've got some listeners that are listening about that. In this arena, in the commercial medical building, what are you seeing from a supply standpoint? And is it specific to larger cities, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, or are you seeing the secondary, tertiary markets as better opportunities there?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's fairly segmented. 2025 year to date transaction volume is down significantly. There's just a lot of hesitation in the capital market space, which we can really dive into later. But in terms of buying opportunities, the market it's been repricing for a few years now, and so buildings are becoming a lot more affordable. There are some good opportunities out there. It's really just you got to find the right group that's willing to take a little bit of risk with the uncertainty we're facing right now with macroeconomic trends, the tariffs, the U.S. credit rating. And so if you're willing to stomach a little uncertainty, there's definitely some good opportunities. And to answer the last part of your question, we are starting to see some of those debt maturities from middle of 2020 during COVID when rates were really good. They were on these 5-year terms that are starting to mature, and rates are going from mid 3s to 7%, and people need to sell. So there's definitely some good opportunities out there.
Is there a specific segment? I imagine there's different types of commercial properties that you deal with for them, whether it's single or maybe there's multi-specialty buildings. Is there something that's better opportunity than another, would you say right now, if that's even a valid question?
Yeah. So I think, when I look at medical space, there's really two types of acquisitions. There's buying for your own practice, which whatever type of practice you have, buy that type of building. If you need a clinic building, go buy it. If you want a surgery center, go buy it. But if in terms of like investment, if I had to just pick from the spectrum from behavioral health all the way up to like micro hospital or something like that, surgery centers I would say, is where the most demand is. Surgery and imaging. Those have been very, very long-term, stable, growing sectors. And there's a lot of talk. My personal opinion is telemedicine has its limits. I think a lot of people would agree that it's helpful and it's easy, but there's definitely limits. You'll always need medical space, but nobody is talking about that like with surgery centers. You're always going to have to go somewhere. And then you're also seeing like a larger shift in healthcare to where pretty much anything we could try to do in an outpatient setting, we want to do. And so you're seeing more invasive and larger procedures getting done in surgery centers, more demand. You're seeing more spine, more ortho, instead of just like the endoscopies and ophthalmology stuff. And so surgery centers is my personal favorite, and we have a killer market share there. We do about 35% of all the private surgery center transactions in Texas. And so the demand on those, I probably average 10 to 12 offers on every surgery center I list.
What's an average size of that building? Are you starting to get larger buildings?
Good question. So I'd say in the surgery center space, that for me personally, it's probably 5 to 20,000 square feet. When you start getting above 20,000 square feet, you start getting above like 4 OR facilities. That's when you start getting into like the institutionally owned stuff, the hospitals and the USBIs and stuff like that. Mine are more regional, maybe a group of docs. Like I just did one in Houston. It was in Webster, and it was a plastic surgery group. They had 4 locations. They just bought a surgery center together and opened it up and signed a lease. And so those are more up my alley than the larger like healthcare affiliated ones.
I was going to ask, are you getting involved where it's already a building in place, or are you helping find the property, develop the land? Where are you guys coming into the transaction?
A little bit of both. I'd say most of the time we'll get involved when it's already in place. So an example, a surgery center we did in Dallas, it was an ophthalmology group. It was 3 different practices. I think there was 7 or 8 physicians, and they all had varying ages. Some were mid 60s, some were early 40s. And so it came to a point where they wanted, some of the partners in the building wanted to cash out, but the others wanted to keep practicing. And so they came to us and said, hey, how can we find a win-win for everybody where we can monetize some of this equity, but they can also keep operating their business? So that's normally where we come in, but we have started getting involved in the development side. We did one here in Austin where they were mid-acquisition of a shell space. We helped them finish the build out. We helped them sign a long-term lease, and that one was awesome. They bought, finished out, signed a lease, and sold probably in the span of under 2 years and made 85% on their cost. They did really well.
Do you have clients that come to you? I would imagine that rent prices have either come down or stabilized from where we saw a spike before. Do you have people say, hey, Ryan, should I buy? Should I keep renting my spaces? What are you seeing is going to happen in the commercial real estate realm and over the next couple of years?
Yeah, definitely. So our team doesn't really do much leasing. So those conversations, occasionally it'll be on like a property that we have listed, but the short answer there is it depends on your time horizon. If you're looking at, hey, is it a good time to buy? If we're looking at compared to the next 3 years, it's a coin flip. But if we're looking over the next 25 years, it's most certainly a good time to buy. And so that's really it. If you're looking at like the long-term play, I always just tell people get involved early, because the longer you wait, the more of a gamble you're going to take with the timing. And real estate's a finite resource. They're not making any more of it, especially in major metropolitan areas. And so to me, the earlier you can get involved, the better it's going to be in the long run. And most of the feedback I hear echoes that is, it was really hard for me in the beginning, but thank God I did it because I just made 8 times my money in 25 years.
Yeah. Or it becomes that anchor, like you were describing earlier. It's a great retirement benefit. So if you sell your practice, you can keep the building, rent that out to the people. And so you have a 2-stage rather than let's sell my practice some point and then move out. The owning the real estate that you're practicing of creates that secondary security blanket.
100%. And there's also, depending on how your income is set up, if you're on like a W-2 income, the more tax shields you can get, the better. I mean, you guys could talk about that all day. And so, real estate provides a very good avenue for some tax shelters and some depreciation, especially with cost seg. Hopefully that comes back with 100% bonus depreciation. So there's a lot of advantages to real estate.
You said something earlier about it being a real challenge on the front end to get into. What are some of the biggest hurdles for them to get a property that they can stay in?
Good question. That feedback was just from some people who tried to do it early in their careers. They're maybe not fresh out of school, but within 5 or 10 years out of school, they're still trying to pay down some debt and they're taking on another big commercial loan. And so that's really where it's the hardest. And then over time, it becomes much easier and you reap the rewards down the road. But in terms of, challenge to get in, there's really not that much. I mean, there's a lot of lenders. You guys mentioned you talked to one earlier who just love physicians. And, we work with a lot of lending groups that specifically lend to physicians. And so people love lending to physicians, one, and then the SBA and other lenders allow for programs that have relatively nominal down payments at 10%. You can do 0% down financing and collateralize some of the business. There's programs like that. So there's a lot of ways in. You can finance the improvements. It's really just finding a place that you're going to be okay with being for a while. And then depending on your growth trajectory, just planning it out. If you can buy, like with the SBA, you can buy a building that you occupy 51% of, and you can lease out the other 49% and still qualify for small business financing. That allows you to grow into it over time. And then you just kind of look at how big do I want to bite off right away? How am I going to grow into it? What's the long-term plan? If business takes off in the next 3-4 years, what am I going to do? And again, that's kind of where we get in at the ground floor and try to strategize every step of the way.
When is a good time for, if somebody's contemplating that? I mean, if they know, hey, I think I'm going to practice in the Sugar Land area, but I don't know that much else. Is that the right time to reach out to you? How narrow of a search do you feel is the timing appropriate for somebody to reach out to you and your team?
Good question. I would say the blanket answer to that is the earlier is always better. I mean, we have just so many tools, whether it be demographic or payer mix and just who is in the area. Do you need frontage? Do you need visibility? Do you need wet medical? Do you need this? And so the earlier we can get involved, we can kind of hone that with you. I would say it's harder when people come to me and say, I need to be in this 2-block radius and I need this exact square footage and I need all of this. It's like, okay, well, there's 10 buildings to choose from. I'll let you know when one's on the market. I think the earlier we can get involved, the more we can find a win for the practice and hone it in together.
I was visiting with the physician, and I recommend them reach out to you. And I said, look, here, the benefit of doing that is Ryan's team will know who's renting out a portion of their building, who's maybe thinking about selling, and they've already approached them and said, hey, if you have an opportunity to come up. And so what I've encouraged our clients is focus on practicing as the physician. Reach out to the experts in that arena and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. A lot of times we don't even know some of the loan availability, or we can come back and say, yeah, it's going to cost this, but with the tax advantages you may be able to incur, here's what you're actually going to be looking at and the real true impact on your bottom line over a period of time. And, frankly, it's just not something that's really taught. And so I find that the more that they can expose themselves to experts in the arena, the more comfortable they become, and then figure out, hey, is this an investment I actually want to be able to move forward with now, or is it something I should maybe put a little time between me and getting out of school or paying off student loans or whatever, buying the house, whatever those other decisions are.
You're 100% spot on. And taking that another level for me, obviously I do the real estate and I know the market and we can help with all those avenues. But another piece of the puzzle for us as an advisor is knowing all of those specialists beyond that. So when you want to come buy a building, do you have a good real estate attorney? Do you have good cost seg study? Do you have a good accountant? Do you have all these other pieces to the puzzle that can make sure you do this right, that we maximize all the benefits, that we prepare for all the different strategies? Do you have a good leasing agent? Are you prepared for every step of the way and to really take advantage of this? Are we just going to kind of wing it and see what happens, right? I mean, we don't want to do that with multi-million-dollar assets.
Are you seeing any practices kind of go the opposite direction? It seems like for several years, practices were getting bought up by hospitals, and that groups were then being sort of subcontracted with. But it just seems, because we're seeing the full spectrum of physician practices, it seems like fewer and fewer are trying to take that plunge and go out on their own and do it all. So I'm really amazed when they're coming out of practice and they go right into owning their own, trying to get the building, trying to get everything set up, and it just really from scratch. So it's a lot for them to try to encounter first off. But are you seeing anybody that's maybe been out in practice a few years, maybe a decade or so, did all these things and kind of now is going back to being a hospital employee or something like that and selling their business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is yes, but I'm seeing it a little different front. And I would love to know your thoughts on this. We're seeing a lot in like the MSO space, the DSO and like veterinary and ophthalmology. You're seeing a lot of practices getting acquired. I mean, there's so many different terms. We partner with them, we acquire them, whatever it may be, but there is some sort of like liquidity event for the practice. The physician has, probably like a 3-year wind down period. And then during that 3 years, they're just an employee. Usually what happens in that case, if they own the real estate, is the MSO or the group that buys it will sign a nice new lease. And that's such a missed opportunity I see very often on the real estate side is, they sell their business and they sign this lease and then they come to me and they say, look what I got. I'm like, we missed 20 things that we could have done to get you 50% more, but now this lease is signed and there's nothing we can do about it. And so that goes back to your get involved early. But yes, I mean, there's a lot of people doing that. I've had a bunch of clients who've sold their practice to WellMed. WellMed's a phenomenal group. They sign great leases. We'll help them sell the real estate after the lease is signed with WellMed. And when that happens, just be very strategic and get us involved early, because once that lease is signed, there's nothing you can do about it.
That's a good tip, especially if people are using it as somewhat of a, I say, pseudo retirement vehicle for cash flow. You might be locked in for something that you really didn't want.
Yeah. Well, and, a lot of people don't know this, but from a commercial real estate financing perspective, for all intensive purposes, anything under 4 years remaining in lease term is really hard to sell. Lenders don't want to finance it. You're not going to get the most attractive rates. There's going to be a huge amount of risk on the deal, so you're not going to get a great price. So, if you go out and sell your practice and you get a 5-year lease, you need to sell it immediately or you need to hold it and hope they renew, because the window of time moves so quickly. A year into that lease, you're already in this gray zone where it's like, only sell it if you need to. Otherwise, you got to hold it. And a lot of people don't know that. And so they'll call you with 3 years, 2.5 years left on the lease. And it's like, man, there's really not much I can do. Do you want to wait or do you want to take a big discount on it? So that goes back to like, again, you get us involved early and we say, hey, what's your plans on selling the building? Because if you want to hold it for a few years and you want to enjoy the income and go do whatever, let's get at least a 7-year or a 10-year. We can give some concessions here. This is how it's going to affect the ultimate disposition value if we get this compared to give them Y. There's different levers to pull. And so really it's, again, like you kind of go back to the bio you read, like what are your ultimate goals? How can we help you achieve them? What levers can we pull? But we can't do any of that if we're not involved early.
I'm sure there's going to be people that are listening that don't understand the connection of why it's important to have that longer term lease and taking action if you were going to sell. Somebody that doesn't see that might say, well, if I'm going to sell, what difference does it make? So will you connect those two pieces for those that might not have seen that?
Yeah, great question. So investment real estate is usually valued off what's called a cap rate, a capitalization rate, basically your return on the property. So if you have a net operating income of 100,000 and you sell it for $1 million, it's a 10% cap rate. 100,000 divided by $1 million. Cap rates really depend on a few major things. They're going to depend on the overall real estate. They're going to depend on the strength of the tenant, and then they're going to depend on the lease term. And so when you look at the lease term, cap rate is really a measure of risk, right? Obviously, there's a formula that you can come up with a value, but the number that anyone pays is relative to the risk involved. And so if I have a beautiful downtown asset, irreplaceable real estate with a S&P rated tenant, I'm going to get a very, very good cap rate versus a rural property with a mom and pop doc that nobody's ever heard of with 3 years left on the lease. The cap rate's going to be very high because there's a lot of risk there. And so to answer your question in a long-winded way, the longer term lease you have, the more security there is on that lease, the lower cap rate you're going to get, which ultimately means higher value.
So that's the connection piece. More simplistic is that if you're looking to sell it and the lease is coming due, you might not get as much trying to sell it later if you wait for that lease to run out.
100%.
Because the person buying it, because the person buying it is also buying that income from that leasee.
100%.
Right.
Yes.
So we've done a real good job educating people on renting single family homes, right? And they're very comfortable with the rent, the mortgage, some holdback for vacancy and some repairs. Then you get into commercial and you start talking about triple net, you start talking about a different way of, can you kind of share the power of a triple net building versus just a standard lease agreement that some of our listeners may be more familiar with?
Yes, I'm like very passionate about that. So thank you for bringing that up.
You don't have to take your clothes off. For people just listening, he started like undressing. I don't know what's going on here.
Just getting me excited here. That
was weird.
So a triple net lease, to your point, Chris, basically the tenant reimburses for all of the expenses. There's some nuance there, but for all intents and purposes, any expenses, taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance, that's all going to be reimbursed by the tenant. And so usually triple net leases are set up to where the tenant pays a base rental amount and then they pay all the expenses on top of it. So you as an investor know I'm going to make this much net income at any given year. The beauty of that compared to residential, I've seen, most residential investing that I've seen, and even that I've done personally, you're really banking on appreciation. There's really not that much cash flow there. You're just trying to get the mortgage paid down. You're trying to have the housing market go up, and you're trying to sell for a profit. The beauty of commercial is you can really get that same appreciation, but also cash flow. And so, example, a good client of mine out of California, a big private investor, probably owns 15 medical buildings now. We did a deal where he basically put in $25,000 to buy a $2.1 million building. On that $25,000, he made about $60,000 to $65,000 a year after debt, after everything. So he was making, call it 12 to 15% on his money. Cash on cash return is what we call that every year. The end of 4 years came up. He re-signed both of the tenants, and he ended up selling that for $3.4 million. And after everything, his $500,000 turned into 1.8. And so he tripled his equity in 4.5 years, and he made 12 to 15% every year doing it. And so that's like stuff I don't see in residential very often. But that's where I think the real difference is in commercials. You can get that cash flow and the appreciation.
Yeah, the stability there of the cash flow. But I always feel like it's almost a better partnership on commercial. It's a different relationship with the tenant. And they're bought it because of that expense structure. They really are coming in and they're covering those costs. And so one of the things I would encourage anybody who's listening, if you're this is not one of those leases you want to go wing it yourself. Truly work with a professional, because as Ryan's talked about, once that lease is signed, you're locked into that, and you can leave a lot of money on the table by not understanding the nuances of the triple net, the nuances of the language in it, the scaling, the inflationary portions of the rent. So just highly, just like we're going to encourage you to work with a good CPA, an attorney. Having a true professional on this side of it can save you some of the numbers that Ryan's talking about.
You're spot on, Chris. The other thing too is, you hear all of these horror stories in residential of the renters, and maybe they're demanding or maybe they default, and there's definitely stories like that in commercial too, but you're typically dealing, especially in medical, with a different caliber. And so for that same example that I just gave on that one deal, one of the tenants had, I want to say 32 locations and a $70 million balance sheet. And then the other was a national credit rated tenant. And so these aren't like small groups that are going to go bankrupt tomorrow. We're pretty confident we're going to get our money from them every month. They own multiple, or they don't own, but they lease multiple locations. They're pretty, I would say, seasoned when it comes to facilities management. You're not going out there to fix light bulbs every other day. It all takes care of itself. And then the other beauty on that note is typically those triple net lease structures reimburse for management fees. And so even if you do need to get a manager and you're out of state or out of the city, you can pay somebody to go do that and get reimbursed by the tenant, so it doesn't affect your bottom line.
I was going to come back and ask a little bit about the example you just gave of your investor out of California. They were making great income and then they turn around and sell it. So I think a lot of times when people are considering it, it's this long-term hold. Well, if it's cash flowing that well, why not keep it? What was the inspiration behind him deciding to go ahead and liquidate at that point? What should somebody, I guess a better way to ask is, what should somebody be considering, so they don't miss a window if that seems to be a good opportunity?
Yeah. So this specific case, he does 1031 exchanges all the time. He really doesn't take the gain. And so basically his strategy is, I'm going to go out and buy, I'm going to get a good return with 4 to 5 year leases left because there is some risk like we talked about. I'm going to re-up those leases and sell it for a profit in 5 years. And then I'm just going to do a 1031 exchange, tax deferred exchange, not pay any of those capital gains. I'm going to go buy something bigger and I'm going to do it again. And so his goal is ultimately to just grow them every 5 years or so. And I think the other thing that he likes a lot is depreciation. He's a high income earner. And so for him, the more tax shields he can get, the better. And every time we go buy something bigger, he gets a bigger basis to depreciate. You can redo some of your cost segs. So there's a lot of advantages for him to not only grow the pie, and I think that also increases his cash on cash return, because if you're getting 12% on 2 million, let's get 12% on 5 million, and it's going to be a bigger number. And so for him, it's always just growing, deferring the taxes, getting some more depreciation, and just keep it rolling every 4 to 5 years. Eventually, he's going to give it to his kids.
What that 1031 is, just for people that they're maybe not familiar with that term.
Sure. So a 1031 exchange is a tax deferred exchange, basically defers all of your capital gains tax. So like in this case, he bought for 2.1, he sold for 3.4. There's a little nuance here with fees and whatnot, but assume he has $1 million gain plus. Instead of going out and paying all those taxes, he's just going to go buy something. There's some regulations you have to follow, such as identification period and the overall timeframes. But you hit all those marks, you go buy a new property, and your taxes are deferred until you sell that next asset. And then the big one for him is there's a big step up in basis when you and your spouse pass away for your kids. So when you, and I'm obviously not a CPA, I got to say that and everything, but when you and your spouse pass away, your kids get a step up in basis to fair market value. So there is a chance that his kids, when they inherit the property, can sell them for zero capital gains. And so that's really his plan, is just accumulate over time, give it to his kids, and they'll be in a really good position.
I think you hit on all the points that make it really attractive. The deductions and write-offs, depreciation, reducing taxable income. I think that's one of the biggest sticker shocks. Is it's great to have a high income, especially when you're coming out of training. I would just tell you that most are just not expecting the tax bill that comes along with that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Especially on the W-2 side.
Well, for sure. And I'll usually tell them if I'm doing some sort of talk or educational lectures, you have to wrap your head around the idea that at one point you're going to pay more in taxes in a year than you're earning completely right now as a resident or fellow. So they're like, what? How? Yeah, it's pretty rough. So congratulations, you're doing well. No, but tongue in cheek, all things aside, it's a great opportunity to take advantage of not only growing your nest egg, but also trying to reduce some of that tax burden, especially, for somebody out there in California. My God.
Yeah. Well, and he's attracted obviously to Texas too. There's a lot of benefits to owning in Texas versus California, New York, Illinois. Texas is a very, very favorable market, especially with the growth we've seen as a state. And so a lot of people love being out here. And he is not, unique in that sense by any means. We see so much capital come into Texas from out of state and even out of the country that it's definitely a good thing for property owners here in Texas, which is another great reason to buy.
So there's lots of opportunity, but it's not all rosy. There's risk with everything. So can you talk a little bit about some of the biggest risks that people should be looking out for? You can't just run out and like buy something expected to make a ton of money. Somebody out there is not always winning.
Yeah, you're right. The biggest risk factor that I look at is always basis. Everybody talks about these like massive exits, and in 2021 and 2022, when debt was basically free, it's like, we're just selling at crazy prices. But I always look at it at the opposite end. A lot of the risk mitigation is based on the basis. So, going back to that same example, when he bought the building, I'm looking at what's the price per square foot, what's the rental rates of the tenants, what's the sizes of the suites, what's the build out, how replaceable are them? Because God forbid something happens to that tenant and they need to vacate and I need to backfill it. Can I get that rent that they're paying or better? How much work are we going to have to put into the suite? Is the suite too big for most groups? And so I always look at making sure you get in at a basis that protects you. And if we can get in at a market return at a below market basis, you're going to be in a really good spot. In terms of like exterior risk factors, a big one we've seen lately is just weather. I've done a bunch of deals in Southeast Houston and everybody knows some stuff's going on out there. And so, that's just kind of a headache more than anything. I mean, you get some hurricanes and some hail and water damage and it's not fun. Don't get me wrong, but ultimately it's not a deal breaker. It's still worth it. In my opinion, it's just a little added headache.
I know Paul asked about impact of maybe not as many people going into the doctor's office or wanting to stay out. And there's obviously AI and different things. One of the things that we focus in the physician market, we don't deal a lot within the dentist market or those other sides. Can you talk about that a little bit? That is one of those professions where you have to go in, right? You're not going to pull your own tooth. I guess you could. Paul pulls his own teeth, but it's frowned upon.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You're going to have to show me your secret.
That's right.
It's the string in the door thing. Come on. I mean, you've got kids. You told us. You should know that. It's got to be coming soon.
Oh, man, I got some stories there. I've had some teeth issues with my 4-year-old, but that's for another time. God, thank God for surgery centers, right? Yeah, I mean, dental is definitely one of those. It's a really hot product type. DSOs, the dental service organizations are really active. And so you're seeing a ton of these practices getting sold to MB2 and Smile Doctor. I mean, just these huge brands. Heartland obviously is one of the largest in the world. And so there's a lot of activity in that space and a lot of people like dental. The one thing that I'd say that I would just always be on the lookout for is it's very common to see like very juiced rental rates. And so that kind of goes back to what I was saying before. They'll come out and I'll see a larger group buy a small practice and they'll pay 50% over market value rent. And then they'll go sign a lease. And it's like, yeah, you're going to get a good return. But when that lease is up, you're going to get hosed. Yeah. And so and a lot of people, they won't want to consult a professional and they don't know what rental rates are. And, it looks great on paper. You're making 7.5% on your money and it's increasing and it's a big tenant. And then in 5 years, you're toast. And so I would be very weary of that, getting back to basis in dental, but dental's great. You're also seeing some expansion into like the retail sector, kind of have a mix of dental right now and like the standalone physician building type dental and then retail strip center. And so, yeah, dental is absolutely great. Just be mindful of the rate.
Yeah. In the Austin area, we're seeing things, whether it be multifamily, other things that are impacted construction starts are slowing or halted in different areas. What are you seeing in your niche in the Texas area?
Yeah, I mean, there's still not enough construction. It's kind of this weird chicken and egg in medical construction.
Mm-hmm.
We're at a really good top point in medical occupancy. I think I just read something the other day that it was like the highest it's been when you look at the top 50 metros in terms of occupancy rate, and it's like 93 or 94% or something like that. And then you look at on campus versus off campus, it's the closest they've ever been. When it comes to occupancy, it's 92 to 93, and rental rates, they're within 10% for the first time ever. And so you're seeing all these great fundamentals for medical, but construction has been slowed over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's just simply due to cost. It's just so expensive to build right now. If you built something in 2018 versus 2 years ago, it's 50, 60% more expensive. And so you have this 7-year-old building that's getting $28 a foot here in Austin, and then this brand new building that's charging 40. And it's like, that's just the way the world works now with everything that's happened over the last 5 years. And it's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. And that's why I think you're seeing construction slowed a little bit, is they're just waiting for a little bit more demand, but it's there.
Yeah.
It's just expensive.
Yeah. The replacement cost is shocking to some people, right? When you're like, you can do this. And again, I would go back to working with a professional who knows all the options that are out there. We can get emotionally tied to a particular area, a particular building, a particular location, and not see the full picture. And then again, go into it, whether you're buying it or signing a long-term lease, you're there for the next 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, where a conversation with somebody like yourself on your team to say, hey, let's look at all the options and make a wise decision based off of that. But I've seen some things where the replacement costs for some of these buildings, the cost drove up so high, just like you're saying, there's such a spread between them. Mm-hmm. You can get some really nice buildings now rather than new construction.
Yeah, you're spot on. And it's still kind of weird in this market though. I mean, most appraisals I see these days don't even have replacement cost on there, because the metric is almost irrelevant. Like, everything is more expensive than it was 7 years ago. And so of course it's below replacement cost. But then you still have this weird balance where people will still pay a little more to be in those newer, nicer buildings. And I say a little more, but it can be substantial. And so it's really, to your point, I mean, get someone involved. I'd love it for me to be me, but get somebody involved in general, and then just make sure you know what you're getting into, because it is a big long-term decision, and you don't want to find out the unintended consequences down the road.
Right. Yeah,
for sure. Ryan, we appreciate you jumping on with us. One of the last questions that we always like to ask is around the title of the show, The Patient Physician. So when you hear that, what does that make you think about?
The patient physician? Ooh, that's a good one. I would say the first thing that comes to my mind is the real estate owner who's just patient and in it for the long term, and knows that if they give it enough time, the odds of their success are extremely high, and they're very long-term focused and growth oriented.
Long-term focus is a good description. I think that's pretty much everything that a physician needs to have every bit of their career. So anyway, Ryan McCullough, Partners Real Estate, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate your insight and education, and wish you the best of success.
Thank you guys so much. This was really fun. I appreciate you having me on the main stage.
Thanks, Ryan.
This conversation was brought to you by Physicians Resource Services, a firm supporting medical professionals to improve their financial situation and pursue their personal and professional goals. The Patient Physician is produced in Austin, Texas. Editing and sound design are in the hands of the PodConnects podcast network. Please email questions or show ideas to info@physiciansrs.com.